So we felt that one of the aspects of CentreCourt, of course, applying to several business schools, and you start to research, you think about the criteria that might matter to you. And so we've twinned some of the schools. Some of you might already have caught the session that we did with HBS and Stanford. Well, of course, on the international scene, two business schools that go together so well, INSEAD and the London Business School. And I'm delighted to welcome an old friend, Sagnik Mukherjee. Sagnik, in fact, was the first person through the door at CentreCourt some four and a half years ago. And now a graduate of INSEAD, graduated last summer 2020, and is a management consultant at Publicis Sapient. It's lovely to see you again, Sagnik.
Likewise, as always, a pleasure.
And Giri Kesavan, who has just graduated from the London Business School. We were saying that graduation plans, it's going to be a mega event with 3 years worth of graduates next summer. Giri, coming out of London Business School, has already secured a position as a strategy manager at Sky. Giri, thank you for joining us at CentreCourt.
Thanks very much.
So, of course, you've done the hard work. You secured the places at the two most selective business schools, international business schools in the world. And I thought we could just start briefly with a little bit of your background. Sagnik, take a couple of minutes just to share studies and the path that you took that then led you to Fontainebleau, Singapore and Abu Dhabi.
Sure. Yeah, so electrical engineer by background, University of Sheffield, MEng. And then I was always still am very passionate about working in energy and, well, nowadays, environment, low carbon, what have you. So I went into oil, gas, and petrochemicals, which back in 2012 was the thing to do. And I worked with BP on the graduate scheme. Started in London, then for my sins was shipped off to Shetland for 2 years doing an ops role, which was something that I never thought I would do in my life. And then moved back to Edinburgh and stayed in Edinburgh for nearly 5 years. I changed roles with BP, moved on to INEOS, another UK headquartered organization, and again did several roles, more strategic actually at INEOS than at BP, which was more engineering and operations. Did a bit of a commercial stint and then decided, I think MBA was the way to go, to take on more strategic decision making in energy if possible, and but also broaden out a bit outside of that if I could.
So any of our viewers that are struggling with the GMAT, the Shetland Islands, these beautiful remote islands off the north coast of Scotland, a great place to do data sufficiency and critical reasoning, right? No distractions. Giri, your Imperial background, tell us a little bit about the path that led to Regent's Park.
Yeah, sure. So I studied at Imperial, same course actually. So MEng in electrical and electronic engineering, graduated in 2014. So as you can imagine, that was a very sort of technical course. I was pretty interested in fintech at the time. So I'd run sort of the finance society at Imperial and so on as well. And that led me to Deutsche Bank, where I worked within product management within the fintech space, really looking at electronic equities trading and building out sort of client-centric electronic trading products. So did that role for exactly 5 years, actually, and then really wanted to do sort of the MBA to add in that strategic skill set and that overall holistic view of business that I really wanted to augment my technical skills with, eventually to land sort of roles within products and technology. So hence LBS, where I joined in August 2019 and just graduated.
So there both of you are enjoying successful careers and arguably could have continued to climb up the ladder without the MBA, but whether it was sort of at that broader strategic perspective, I guess there are many criteria. Sagnik, for you, what was the sort of impetus that said, right, I think business school is the right next step, and what were the criteria that you were really important to you when choosing which schools to apply to?
Yeah, so I think I in my head, and the journey, the anguish I went through for business school journey, but it almost helped me in a very cathartic way, helped me split the decision making. First was why business school, why MBA in the first place? And for me, it came down to a very simple thing. In my organization, as you said, I was going up the chain. I was sort of going to take the next step and lead my own team, or I had the opportunity to go on to more technical leadership because I'd done electrical engineering at that point for about 7 years, almost 6, going on to 7 years. I was chartered. So it was either people management or technical management, and I wasn't really ready to settle on either, because I felt I needed to learn a lot more about business, a lot more about strategy, and a lot more about just people leadership as well. And I'd seen this in purely technical organizations a lot, where engineers, good, very promising engineers, are promoted, given responsibility of managing projects, teams, people, but they haven't been given the right sort of teaching, right kind of skill set, right kind of school to actually learn what that is, what general management is. And I felt that was lacking, and I didn't want to be that person. Even if I wanted to stay in energy, for example, or go back to ENEOS, I didn't want to do that without a formal background in it. And business school was the best way to actually do that, take time off, step away from what I'm comfortable with and do something uncomfortable, and see whether I strive in that, whether I thrive in that, whether I actually enjoy it. And it was like the litmus. And so from that point of view, it was then about school selection. And because I'd already had a few sort of failures into getting into business school, GMAT, that final attempt, I really wanted to be sure that my school selection is on point, to the point where if I got into any of my 4 selected schools, I would just happily take it and not even have a single iota of doubt or regret that I didn't go here, I didn't go there. So that's what it came down to. And finally, I was very sure that I didn't want to go to the US. Trump kind of helped that decision making a lot more. And then I had the European schools. I love Europe also. I love the culture. And so I felt, yeah, this is where I want to be, and went for it.
Right. There's a lovely humility embedded in there, just in terms of the idea of wanting to continue to learn, and of course all of the efforts that you then put in, presenting your best self. Giri, similarly, financial services, of course, is well represented by MBA graduates. Did it seem a very natural next step?
I think it's interesting. I was actually asked this in the LBS interview. It's like, hey, you're already in a good career trajectory. Why give it all up? And I think for me, the real sort of understanding was, if I look back on what I actually enjoyed doing at Deutsche Bank, it wasn't so much sort of the technology piece. It was actually learning how the organization worked, dealing with different stakeholder groups, influencing and communication. So I was really interested in sort of elevating my skills in that area and learning management almost as a science there. Because what I really found, and it kind of ties into what Sagnik said, was, there are people who are pure sort of strategists who come up with strategy. There's obviously engineers who deliver and execute, but who actually sits in between and looks at both sides of the coin, I felt would be a really, really unique skill set with my own background, to couple that technical MEng skill with the MBA as well, to really add value across that entire chain of change, as it were. And I think for me, it comes back down to what I always advise applicants in the LBS essays as well, really answer sort of the 3 questions: why MBA, why LBS, and why now? And for me, those 3 whys really stood out to me, because I really wanted to, I was at a point in my professional career where I frankly felt very comfortable. I used to come into work really knowing exactly what I wanted to do and what I wanted to get out of the day. So I wanted an experience that would challenge my thinking and elevate my perspective on business. And for me, LBS really stood out to me as a fantastic school, where not only I could learn from others and learn from this amazing diverse set of students in a global context, but also add impact. And I think a lot of what LBS is about is, and business school in general, is about the 2-way process, right? So student-led impact for me was a huge component of why I picked LBS. And talking to sort of alumni, talking to current students, I felt a really personal connection to the school. And clearly that showed in sort of the application as well, for which I'm thankful for.
And I assume that David's team liked the answer that you gave in the interview as well.
I certainly hope so, yes.
But both of you have talked of taking yourselves out of your comfort zone, which by implication is a very comfortable place to be. 2 schools, and perhaps Sagnik, modesty prevents you, but I'm going to share the rest of the world that of those 4 schools. I mean, you got multiple offers, and then faced with the choices, sometimes that can be the hardest step of actually finding the right. So the 1 year versus 2 years, How did sort of course length and this idea of, it's like drinking water out of a fire hydrant at INSEAD. You work hard, you play hard.
Yeah, actually, maybe in this case, since you brought it up, I will say, as you very well know, LBS was my first choice for a long time. Actually, maybe even 48 hours before or 36 hours before the INSEAD deposit deadline, LBS was still right there, and right in the end, I changed my decision, which I mean, I deliberated over that decision for months. It was very hard for me to make that choice in the end. And yeah, I mean, across the other 4 schools. So for me, course length wasn't so much of a deciding factor. I think, as I said before, I picked HSA, ESA, LBS, INSEAD. I think in that 4, I'd kind of force myself to think that if I get any one of them, I'm happy, I'm going to go. They all have few things in common, which are great. They're all very international. They're all shorter than the 2-year standard US length. And they all had slightly flexible options of exiting if you wanted to, INSEAD, barring INSEAD, obviously. So for me, those are the 4. I didn't think I was going to get into INSEAD. LBS, in a way, was something that I was really going after. So I put in a lot of heart, put a lot of thought into it. I went and met David at the MBA CentreCourt event, and hoped that would get me some brownie points at least, or at least some insight into what he wants to see. So that really helped. So for me, it wasn't the 1 year, 2 year. It was like, this school, these are the schools that I want to go. After the decision for the 1 year and 2 year, or 1 year versus more than 1 year, came down to LBS v INSEAD, where I was actually really scared that I'm not cut out for INSEAD 10 months, because I just did not think that intensity would suit me. I would not enjoy that intensity. LBS, on the other hand, I had kind of made up my mind, either 18 or 21 months. I was happy to move back down to London again since 2012. So I was looking forward to living around Regent's Park. But one thing that happened actually for me was at the LBS round 1 admits weekend, I realized that everyone who was there, or a lot of people who were there rather, especially not from the UK, had come to LBS to be in London. And I can't remember who it was, but one of the faculty members who did a presentation said, look at LBS's branding. It says London first and business school second. So it is about London. And I totally agree with that. And at that moment, it was like, for me, I have done 1 year of work in London. I've lived in the UK for very long. This feels like home. Let me actually step into something that makes me uncomfortable. And INSEAD, that fear that I can't do the 10 months, actually was very elevating, almost, because it kind of decoupled any expectations that I had set for myself. So I stepped into INSEAD thinking literally no expectations. And it's such a counterintuitive thing to say for an MBA or aspiring MBA candidate, because all you do is drive your goals, right? You drive after your goals. So for me, it was like, I'm going to put it down right to the basics. If I get a decent enough job post INSEAD, I'm happy. And then literally that was a starting point. And from then on, anything else was a bonus. And it almost like, I don't know, like it freed me of my own constraints. And I just went after things without any risk in mind. I was just like, I'm going to do this because I want to do this at this point in time, and then see what happens.
Giri, Sagnik talks about the different options. Of course, you took the full 2 years, the 21 months. There is the 18 and 15-month option. I will pick up on the idea of London, because you actually have sort of spoken publicly about how much more than London the experience was.
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things about LBS is that it's leveraging London as a location to really look at global opportunities. And my view is actually I could stay here and have everyone come to me, as it were, from a very international sort of cohort, which was an amazing experience from my side as well. And I think what I really found unique about LBS was the fact that we're really on the lookout for sort of international experiences and opportunities as well, all the way from sort of the academic curriculum, whether that's through all of our treks and experiences globally, through the guest speakers that come in, through even sort of the focus of the Career Center on actually looking at global opportunities, whether that's sort of the US, continental Europe, London itself, Africa or Asia. And I found that that really sort of spoke to me well in terms of an international outlook from the school. And I think that remains sort of one of the key elements of the school that I look back on and think, wow, actually that was true to word, and it was a truly international experience, even though I was obviously born and brought up in the UK.
Right, and in terms of the course length, Sagnik talked about the intensity at INSEAD. I mean, it's not so much less intense at London Business School. I'm sure.
I think what you'll find
very quickly.
Yeah, and what you'll find is that any MBA program, right? You ask any student across any school, you go there and everyone's like, oh my God, this is complete chaos. There's too much stuff going on. Whether the course is sort of 10 months, 15 months, or 21 months, I think that intensity is always there. I think what really stood out to me from an LBS standpoint, taking sort of the longer course option, was the ability that I was able to sort of spread out my electives. So I was able to do term time internships during the program, which were a bit more risk-free, as it were, because I wasn't constantly worrying about sort of full-time recruiting. And actually my role at Sky, I only applied for in March because I had that luxury to sort of obviously spend my time in other industries throughout sort of the 2 years. And that meant that I was able to really understand and do internships across multiple industries, but also multiple stages of a company's growth, which I found personally very rewarding. So worked in a startup in tech for a bit. I worked at American Express for my sort of structured summer internship. Then did a side project with BCG Digital Ventures, did another term time internship in VC, and used all of that sort of personal and professional experience to inform my future sort of career decision. So I felt that the flexibility of the program really sort of spoke to me in terms of one versus 2 years. And I think, it's really interesting when as a student ambassador, I speak to sort of hundreds of applicants at LBS, and they always ask me, oh, how do you choose between schools? And I think really it's to do with sort of the cultural fit that you have at the school. And I always tell people, it's like, frankly, the answer is not always LBS. The answer is not always INSEAD. The answer is the school that you identify the most with, because that's actually where you're going to enjoy your experience and where you're going to have the most fun, contribute to the community, and get the most out of the business school that you choose as well. So I think that for me was really sort of the deciding factor.
Right, so lots of brownie points for meeting David Simpson. In terms of finding that fit, and Sagnik, of course, your extensive research of multiple schools, what did you find proved to be the most informative to give you that sense of the energy, the opportunities a school would offer you?
I think visiting all the schools makes a huge difference. So I was just going to echo what he said about the cultural fit, and what really echoes with you makes a huge difference. For me, the troubling thing was, a lot of things at HSA, at ESA, actually ESA, living in Barcelona. I mean, if you want to live in Barcelona, go to ESA, right? Like, there is no, I mean, that was one kind of soul crushing thing for me, to be like, oh, I wish INSEAD was in Barcelona. But Fonty is great. And actually, INSEAD was the only school that I didn't visit. So it is a bit counterintuitive to what I've just said, to say that visit the schools that you want to visit. But that makes a huge difference. I think it's really important to visit the schools, to speak to people who have just graduated, speak to people who've graduated a few years, 0 to 5 years, and also speak to if you've been admitted, speak to your cohort. I mean, I did that extensively. I was actually in the LBS chat for a long time for the first round one admits, to the point where a lot of my friends, and actually I think Giri and I would have been the same class if I had joined LBS. So, a lot of them are graduating right now, and I'm actually going to meet them and having drinks with them. So it is important to have that cultural fit. I think the one other thing I will add on the course length, what Giri said is spot on. And I think you gave me this advice because I reached out to you and said, Matt, I don't know what to do, genuinely don't know what to do. And you said, LBS is for explorers, INSEAD is for hunters. I think that analogy really stuck with me. So if you need the time out to explore different internships, different opportunities, different projects like Giri has done, LBS or a longer course will definitely give you that bandwidth to do that. INSEAD, especially the J term, there's no internship. So you got to be super clear about that. If you want to work in investment banking and you haven't, you don't come from an investment banking background or finance background, you're not getting in from a J batch, like as simple as that, without the internship, because that's how investment banking's companies hire. So that clarity is very important. You can go for the D batch at INSEAD. You can do the internship, and a lot of people go through that, but make sure that the J batch is not then your target if you need an internship to get in. If you don't need an internship to get in, then, and you know, depending on what stage of your life and career and family you're at, maybe 10 months or 12 months is just enough to you to make that transition. Because I was able to use my 10 months to do a pseudo internship with PCG. I was able to do a consulting project with Deezer, which is Friend Spotify. I was able to do another live action learning project for private equity, but it's all about then prioritization. So you have to decide at every point in every hour, every minute of your INSEAD journey, even at LBS, I'm sure people do this, but INSEAD is even more to say, I have 4 things I can do in the next hour, which is the one thing that I really, really want to focus on, because it really helps me in my journey of hunting for what I'm going after. And I think that made it.
I feel like I'm going to get in trouble for that hunters and explorers analogy, but I'm glad that it resonated with you. Giri, of course, you talk to many, both of you are incredibly accessible, wonderful ambassadors of your schools. As you sort of think about, you know, finding out that right fit, Giri, what do you think beyond campus visits really helps and resonates with people?
I think a lot of it is talking to students who have come from sort of different backgrounds, different experiences, reaching out to them, understanding their journey, but also reaching out in the right way as well, right? So making sure that you're going in with sort of a clear idea of what you want to get out of the conversation, to learn about a specific area of the school, and to really go beyond what's on sort of the INSEAD website or the LBS website, or stuff that you can find very organically. And I think, you know, one of the things that I always tell sort of applicants is that, you know, read my blogs, read the LinkedIn posts, read the admissions blog, read everything that we put out there, really get a feel for what it's like to be in our shoes as a student. And I found that really useful when researching the school as well, and taking that approach to actually say, well, going beyond sort of the website and the numerous events that recruitment and admissions put on, actually talking to the students, finding out that more candid view of what life is actually like at the school was very important. And to be honest, it's something that we really value in applicants as well. There's literally space on the LBS application to write about the students you've met and visited. What did you learn from them? What did you find interesting? How did that really inspire you to learn more about LBS and inform your sort of MBA journey? So LBS is a very personal application. It's a very introspective MBA application. So we always ask questions which test your thinking across those sort of 3 whys. And I think a lot of good answers to that application would really stem from actually talking to current students and finding out what's happening on the ground.
Right. And I always think it's very telling. There are 1 or 2 US business schools, we won't name names, where you know, alums are not responsive, which I think perhaps sends its own message about the sort of the culture and energy that's there.
Well, I think it's very, very important. Just to add quickly, I think, you know, our MBA interviews are all done by alums, so it's a very self-selecting as a cohort, and that makes complete sense. I mean, who better to see if students can be a great fit for the school than people who have gone through that process? So I think that's why sort of our amazing LBS alumni community are so open to having these conversations and actively get involved in recruitment and admissions for future classes as well.
Right.
And just to add on to that,
you landed that great job, and you said, well, if I get a great job coming out of one of these top schools, you know, anything else is a bonus. As you reflect on the year, did it live up to, or perhaps even exceed, your expectations?
Yeah, I mean, INSEAD exceeded in overall on a lot of counts. It exceeded my expectations in a lot of ways. And also, I think a slightly different way to think about it is that, as I said before, I stepped in with very low expectations, both from myself and from the school, to say whatever happens now is going to be a bonus. So I think that mindset, obviously that was more of a personal level, but yeah, I think outside of that, INSEAD definitely exceeded it. And if I want to give dimensions to it, I think let's start with the personal and the really long-term stuff, the relationships, the friendships that I've made. I mean, everyone says this, it sounds like a tagline for MBA schools, but it's true. I think some of the friends you make, the closest friends you make at business school are lifelong friends. You can trust and rely on them all the time. I have a running chat with one person in Dubai, Singapore, and the other one in London, and we're all constantly talking to each other. All four of us are consultants. Well, we have to be because we're from INSEAD. And yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing. And then you have the whole network remaining who are just as good classmates, and you can, you continue to reach out to them. I think I am an engineer. I went as an engineer with a lot of operations and design background, zero business background. So for me, like literally every class was value adding. I think a lot of people say this, that, oh, you don't really learn anything at business school. I think for me, that's definitely not true. I learned a lot of things at business school that I didn't know, I think. And then the experiential stuff. I mean, INSEAD, just how intense it was and how much travel we did, despite obviously 40% of it was affected by COVID. But even in the 60%, the travel I did, the intense schedule that I was on a daily basis really helps me in my consulting life today. I have to say, like that was the best consulting boot camp that I can do. And it makes sense. I mean, that's why so many from INSEAD go into consulting, because it's like you learn to live that life even before you start that job. So it really helps.
So, Giri, you're perhaps now a master of discounted cash flow, and you have learned many, many things in the 2 years. What do you feel that you've learned about yourself? Perhaps, some of those less tangible things that aren't overtly, described in the curriculum descriptions.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think I'd sum up sort of the LBS MBA as like the school doesn't teach you what to think, but rather how to think. And in one sentence, I think that is fundamentally across all business schools, like the approach to MBA education. And I think that concept is really important to go in with as well. You're constantly being challenged on how to think. And for me, in terms of sort of exceeding expectations, I think I went in with very high expectations actually of LBS, having researched the school sort of in depth, and they were absolutely exceeded, hugely across all dimensions, from an academic standpoint, a student-led standpoint, a career center standpoint, an alumni and advancement network standpoint as well. As Sagnik said, I think like the alumni network and the friendships that you build with a very diverse set of people who are equally as ambitious, equally motivated, I think is incredible. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me that I wasn't expecting when I went into the MBA is that propensity for sort of student-led impact. I was very fortunate to be involved very heavily with the school and continue to be involved very heavily with the school from a more organizational standpoint. And I think it really comes down to the fact that at LBS, we don't feel as if we're like given a degree by an institution. Rather, we work with the institution to craft a very unique 2-year journey that we can all be proud of and say that we collaborated on. And that means that the program continuously evolves to student interests. So a lot of what I did was really pivot the school towards more of a focus on technology and product careers. And that's meant that nearly half the students at the school go into tech roles and now, which is a huge shift in sort of the demographic that we've seen over the last few years. And I think all of that was made possible by the fact that actually the school works with its students in crafting a value proposition that we could be proud of together. And I think that I was genuinely not expecting that when I started the program, which was amazing.
Right, and staying with you, Giri, because you were the co-chair of the Tech and Media Club, student ambassador, there's so many opportunities for clubs, treks. What do you think that brings?
I think it really brings two things. So firstly, I think the unique perspectives and the network that you build beyond actually the MBA. I think one of the things that I found really interesting at LBS was, especially in our elective courses, it's not just your MBA class, but actually the year below, our executive MBA students, our Sloan Master students, the early career students. So finding people, again, who are coming from different backgrounds at different stages of their career, who can challenge your thinking, not only even in like your own MBA class, I think really brought a breadth of that network at different stages of a career growth. And I think secondly, it allows you to test what you're learning in the classroom really in sort of a very student context in terms of leading a student organization. The stuff that I was doing for the Tech and Media Club and working with the school on technology, education and careers is almost treated as an organization, right? It's about how we can affect change in an institution, in an organization. And I think it really allows you to test what you're learning in the classroom straight away out in quote industry, but it's actually in a much more safer space. And I think, frankly, I'm sure it's the same at INSEAD, but the travel, the treks, even in a virtual context, we're doing virtual treks, it just never ends, to be honest. And it really boils down to the fact that it's really about sort of a student journey that's constantly striving to learn more from different experiences. And I think that is really the ethos of LBS. It's about doing many, many things that contribute towards your overall personal and professional journey.
Right, and you managed to squeeze NYU in as an exchange. Sagnik, I can remember.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
From,
yes,
from Abu Dhabi, and saying, love the energy and the experience. So as class president, you were you ran the Energy Club. There's the Whiskey Club. I think we can say that publicly. But again, coming from perhaps engineering, process sort of background, to have those leadership opportunities, do you think, Sagnik, that contributed to your growth and development?
Oh, 100%. I think the one thing I would add to Giri's list of two things that he said is resilience. I was the class president for the first batch that faced COVID. That was uncertainty like never before. It was almost like, okay, next week it's going to open, next week it's going to open, what's going to happen, and coordinate. I remember I was doing my, of course, because between France and Singapore, the time difference was crazy. So I was doing calls with the administration and the dean throughout the day. And I think I had my McKinsey round 1 interview in the middle of that. And I think I said to one of the interviewers, can we end this on time, because I have another call to go to. So I think that level of resilience I would never have got from any of the other experiences. I was president for the Energy Club before, when things were normal, and class president and vice president for the Environment and Business Club. But I think it wasn't about the clubs per se, but it was more about actually having those responsibilities and juggling all three of them. That actually builds some level of, and making it more tangible rather than resilience, is about client management and upward management. I don't think I had envisaged when I was becoming, or I was told I'm now president of my team 1, that I would be speaking to the dean of INSEAD and the dean of MBA so much, let alone actually start negotiating with the chairman of INSEAD, who I never thought I was going to speak to him. Like, who does that, right? And to prepare for that, and then be ready for your classes, and then take care of your housemates, and make sure that everyone who's traveling around from INSEAD, who are stuck at different exchange locations, are safe. I think that's an experience that I would never get anywhere else. Not that I'm saying the COVID was a good thing at all, obviously, but I think every MBA has some similar story, some similar war story of having, managing children. Like, I don't know how those parents do it who come into an MBA with a newborn baby. Like, oh my God, I barely fed myself. Like, these people feed someone else. So I think everyone has that resilient story that they go through, the arc that they go through, which I think changes you in a very positive light, regardless of what you want to go do, right? And if you start taking on more serious responsibility straight out of INSEAD or LBS journey, you're already ready for it. Like, these stories come back in handy. It's not just about having an interview answer, but actual real life experience to fall back on in your mind to then tackle, difficult clients. I think that's the experience that you take away.
Right. So I mean, you're both vibrant with these many, many aspects, and the lifelong friendships, and just thinking about how to think. As our viewers now, inspired from the experiences that you've shared, take that step and apply to the schools. Giri, advice. You've talked about that sort of spontaneity, making sure that you answer the 3 whys. How do you sort of structure your advice to applicants?
Sure. I think in terms of applicant advice, I think the main thing really is to really research the school by talking to its students, ensuring that you have that culture fit. And then in the application, as simple as it sounds, answer the questions from the heart, right? Be very introspective, reflect, think, and then write. It shouldn't be sort of scripted. There is no right answer to any of these essays, etc. I think from an LBS standpoint, we ask applicants to do a lot of short answer questions as well. So really think about sort of how your application reads very holistically. Do you have a great collection of personal and professional stories that create impact? I think that's fundamentally what we're looking for. Like, can you create impact, have the propensity to create impact and inspire people? And I think that really needs to shine throughout sort of the application. So really think about sort of how you're presenting your story there. And I think being true to yourself is absolutely key. I think there's this common like misconception that you have to sort of fit a mold, but actually don't try too hard to fit a mold, or actually on the converse, don't try too hard to be different as well. Do not try too hard to be different. Be yourself, write the answers from the heart, and really spend that time to have a very holistic view of that entire process. I think what I commonly see in sort of applicants is that people spend too much time on one part of the process, whether that's the GMAT, whether that's like the recommendations, whether that's sort of the one essay, whether that's the CV. Again, it's about really being holistic and having all those experiences. It's similar, it's a microcosm of the LBS experience itself. How have you drawn on all of your experiences across your career, across your personal life, and how can you put all that into one holistic application that makes you an interesting individual who has the propensity to create impact on business? I think that's key.
Sagnik, with your personal journey, and of course, you know, studies, working for BP, INEOS, and then there's this opportunity to step back with the applications to business school. Is it possible then to enjoy that whole journey of introspection that Giri describes?
Yeah, totally. I think for me, GMAT was always an anguish, and I realized it was a very, you know, inner peace kind of weird way. Like it sounds so weird that I found my inner peace through the difficulties of GMAT, but I did. In the way that I actually was getting so frustrated with myself and the journey that I almost thought I'm not going to do this anymore because this GMAT is a waste of my time. But I had to step back and actually decouple GMAT prep and application for business school. What I was doing before is what logically you do. I want to go to LBS. They need an average of X. I'm going to target that score. What I ended up doing in the end, which really helped me, was that, you know, again, take away the baggage of why I'm doing the GMAT. I'm just doing the GMAT because I think I might go into business school, and then let me get the best score that I can get and then be done with it, which at that point was 700. I was like, okay, I'm not going to try ever again for this. And then think about the schools that I want to do. And that's why the curated list of 4 that I came to, I was so happy with them that when I made the application for it, the thought had gone in so much because I had basically created an application strategy for each school. What Giri just said, right? Research the school, know why you and the school together can create a much bigger whole than just 1 + 1 is 2, right? Otherwise, you'll go to a school feeling, you know, if it was your second choice, for example, or I hate people who say, this is my backup school. If you get into that backup school, are you going to go with sadness and start your MBA journey, which is such a special journey, with a tinge of regret? It's going to really, really dampen that experience. I think the better thing to do is think about those 2, 3, maybe max to max 4. Don't go beyond that. Say, these are the schools that really resonate with me, and I will resonate with the school. And together, what Giri just said, that together it'll be a co-crafted, co-created journey that is unique to me and that will help me get to my goals. And so for me, I started with INSEAD. INSEAD is such a long application, goes so deep. I loved the application. I loved pouring time onto it, tweaking it every day. I was tweaking it at work. I was tweaking it, thinking about it on the drive back. I was tweaking it at night. So it's just like, it was my story. Same for LBS, but it was different focus. I was a reapplicant to LBS, so I had to write the second essay at LBS and why I was reapplying. And I was so funny that, you know, I was trying to explain why I had applied before, and from there to where I reached today. And it was amazing. And I read my first LBS application and it was so bad. What Giri was just saying, I was trying to fit a mold. I was trying to see, oh, what is the story that they'll like? Whereas the second application was just so much simpler. It was just like, this is who I am, this is what I want to do. And for all these reasons that I've thought about, LBS and I will make a great partnership. Same with ESA, same with HEC. I think I put in a lot of time thinking about these schools. And so that thought, that belief that I am convinced about it came out in my application. And I guess that came out to them as well.
With the enthusiasm you both share, Giri, my final question for you, if you were to do it all again, and then it sounds like you would, what would your advice be to yourself with everything that you've learned, what would your advice be as you started the program?
I think the main thing is to really pace yourself and don't sort of be caught up in the crowd. I think is one of the key pieces of advice I'd say. And I'm actually speaking at MBA 2023 orientation next month, and I'm going to say exactly the same thing to them. I think you're so true to yourself during the application process, etc., and so on. Once you start the program, it's very easy to sort of fall into the trap of saying, "Oh, everyone's doing this, so I should be doing the same as well." I think the trick to really getting the most out of your MBA journey is to just stop, checking yourself, pace yourself, and do the things that you know in your heart and mind that really add value to your experience. And I think that's sort of a key piece of advice I'd say for those sort of joining any MBA program, really, not just LBS.
Right. And Sagnik, you had demonstrated resilience in applying, obviously resilience as you went through a pandemic, but perhaps other advice that you would have wanted to have in the back of your head as you began the INSEAD MBA?
I wouldn't do anything differently in my experience. I think the amount of time I had given, the mental bandwidth I'd given to this, I had really thought this through. And I had spoken to a lot of people who had asked this question, what would you do differently? And when they gave it to me, I made a list and I made sure that I do that. So one advice everyone gave to me is that, take a break before you go join an MBA. I took that downtime. People said, speak to your friends, speak to your family, tell them you will not be available as much as you have been. And I'm a very active social person in my friend circle. From my school, university friends are all over the world. My family, they live in India. But I explained it to everyone that, hey, I'm going to be really, really busy. So just don't expect the same level of time from me. But if you reach out, I'll try my best to reply. I think the same thing, like what Giri said, stay true to that self-discovery journey that you went in the application. And what I mean by stay true is you don't have to stick to what you said in your story. Like that's absolutely fine. But stay true in terms of what is important to me, and use that question literally for the next hour, for the next half day, for the day ahead, for the next week, and the next month, and so on and so forth. I think especially if you're going to INSEAD, you don't have the time to, to say, okay, today I'm not going to do something, or be a little careless. I think it's okay to be careless, but make that a choice. Make that a choice to say, today I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to relax, unwind. Absolutely fine. But make sure you take that conscious decision to come to that outcome, rather than coming out of the hour and saying, oh, I've lost the hour. Like it's just gone. Time is that, especially at INSEAD, that time is gone. But I think that skill set is so good because that applies to things you do post MBA as well in your job, especially when you're doing consulting. And actually, to be fair, any job, when you become a general manager, you always have 5 fires to put out. And if you can really teach yourself and train yourself to pick the right fire every time, you're becoming a better manager, right? So I think that skill set is very important. And it's not just INSEAD. I think LBS is equally, it would be equally as compelling, especially when you have more time. Like, I think that's when it's even more important that if I have extra time, extra bandwidth to think about things, let me maximize and prioritize it in such a way that it's the most productive in terms of my development. So I think it becomes even more important in longer business school courses where you have a second year or a second semester where you have a lot more time and you can figure out what you want to do. And totally echo, I think, don't follow the herd. Like, decide why something is good for you or why something's not good for you. Just because you're going to INSEAD doesn't mean you should go into consulting. Like, that is like the wrong way to approach it. I know a lot of my classmates who are becoming incredibly successful entrepreneurs, and from day one they knew they wanted to be entrepreneurs and they did not deviate from that path. And equally, there are other people who did that. So I think, be true to yourself. I think that's like the most important advice that I would give to anyone.
So you see, Giri, Sagnik asked this question, made a note of it, applied it all before he started. So that incoming class of 2023 you're speaking to next week, they'll be hanging on your every word. I'm sure our viewers are too. You've both taken a lot of time and shared a tremendous number of insights, wonderful ambassadors for both London Business School and INSEAD, and we're delighted to have had you with us at CentreCourt this year. So thank you to both of you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.